You won't want to miss this. Before we jump in, hit subscribe, like this video, and drop a comment. Trust me, you'll be glad you did. Commander Elias Varan leaned against the observation deck railing of Coalition Station Argent Vale, watching the iridescent hues of a gas giant swirl below. The station bustled with activity, as personnel in sleek uniforms and automated drones wove through the corridors with practiced efficiency. Elias wasn't paying attention to the commotion. His focus was on the procession of alien delegates moving across the docking bay, their crystalline forms catching the station's artificial light. The group was led by Ambassador Karen Solovran of the Unyielding, a species renowned for their glass-like exoskeletons and elegant, geometric forms. Each step the Unyielding took was accompanied by a faint chiming sound, like the resonance of wind through fine crystal. They always look like they're auditioning for some cosmic ballet, muttered Lieutenant Clara Reeve, Elias's friend and chief engineer. She stood next to him, her arms crossed as she watched the Unyielding with a mix of curiosity and disdain. Elias smirked. I'll admit, they've got a certain, theatrical flair. But you can't deny their tech is centuries ahead of ours. Sure, but it'd be nice if they didn't act like we're one step removed from banging rocks together, Clara shot back. Elias tracked Ambassador Solovran as she passed a human technician who hastily bowed and scurried out of her way. Solovran's crystalline face remained unreadable, but the subtle flicker of her form suggested irritation. She's not exactly a fan of humans, Clara added, tapping her wrist console to pull up a profile. Word is she once called us biologically inefficient at a coalition summit. Elias sighed. That sounds about right. What's she here for? Something about a joint recovery mission, Clara replied. Apparently, an ancient Unyielding artifact was detected in uncharted space. You know how they get about their relics. Before Elias could respond, the station's intercom chimed. Commander Elias Varan, report to Admiral Cavern's office immediately. Clara raised an eyebrow. Looks like you're in demand. Lucky me, Elias muttered, pushing off the railing. Catch you later, Clara. The walk to Admiral Cavern's office gave Elias a moment to reflect on the increasing tension between the Coalition and the Unyielding. Relations had always been tenuous. Humans were seen as the brash newcomers in a galaxy dominated by older, more advanced species. Elias had joined the Coalition fleet to prove humanity's worth, but moments like this made him wonder if they'd ever truly be accepted. The office door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing Admiral Cavern standing by a holo-display. Beside him, Ambassador Solovran loomed, her crystalline form radiating an almost blinding light in the confined space. Ah, Commander Varan, Cavern said, gesturing him forward. Perfect timing. I'd like you to meet Ambassador Solovran. Elias stepped forward, offering a polite nod. Commander Elias Varan. It's an honor. Solovran's gaze swept over him, her crystalline features shifting in what Elias interpreted as barely concealed disdain. This is the pilot you spoke of, she asked, her voice a melodic chime that somehow conveyed skepticism. Commander Varan is the best we have, Cavern said firmly. Given the importance of this mission, we need someone with both his skill set and experience. Elias folded his arms. What mission are we talking about? Cavern activated the holo-display, which projected a star map with a pulsing marker deep in uncharted space. The Unyielding have detected energy signatures matching the radiant core, a lost power source from their golden age. It's a relic of immense significance, both technologically and culturally. Elias raised an eyebrow. And you want me to fly the ambassador to retrieve it? Correct, Cavern confirmed. This mission is critical. A successful recovery could strengthen relations between our species. However, uncharted space is unpredictable, and the core's energy readings suggest unusual environmental hazards. Elias studied the display, feeling a pang of unease. So, you need someone who can handle a ship under less than ideal conditions. Makes sense. Solovran's crystalline form flickered faintly, her equivalent of a frown. With all due respect, Admiral, I find this arrangement questionable. A human lacks the precision and finesse required for such a delicate operation. Elias's lips twitched into a grin. I've flown through plasma storms, dodged asteroid fields, and landed on planets with gravity so strong it cracked the hull. I think I'll manage. How typically human, Sullivan replied, her tone laced with disdain. Confusing brute force with competence. Kavrin's expression hardened. This decision is final, Ambassador. Commander Varan will pilot the mission. The two of you will depart tomorrow. Sullivan's crystalline surface shimmered with irritation, her form briefly emitting a sharp tone. Very well. But I want it noted that I object to this arrangement. Noted, Kavrin said dryly. Dismissed. As Elias followed Sullivan out of the office, he couldn't resist a quip. I think that went well. Don't you? Sullivan paused mid-stride, turning to face him. Up close, the intricate patterns of her crystalline structure were mesmerizing, refracting the station's lights into shifting rainbows. Let me be clear, Commander, she said, her voice sharper than before. I am not here to indulge your species' fragile egos. My sole concern is the recovery of the radiant core. You are merely a means to an end. Elias smirked. I'll take that as a compliment. Her crystalline body emitted a brief pulse of light before she turned on her heel and strode off toward the docking bay. The ship assigned to the mission was the Eclipse Veil, a sleek, heavily modified scout vessel designed for exploration. Elias had flown countless ships in his career, but this one was a marvel. Advanced shielding, experimental navigation systems, and a state-of-the-art AI interface made it the perfect choice for the unpredictable nature of uncharted space. As Elias conducted his pre-flight checks, Sullivan arrived, her crystalline form practically glowing with disapproval as she examined the ship. This is our transport, she asked, her tone dripping with skepticism. Elias grinned, gesturing grandly. The Eclipse Veil. Fastest ship in the sector. She's got reinforced hull plating, a quantum drive for FTL travel, and enough firepower to make most pirates think twice. What's not to love? It looks improvised, Sullivan said. Some of the best things are, Elias replied. Now, would you like the grand tour? Or should I just show you to your quarters so you can start compiling a list of complaints? Sullivan gave him a withering look but followed him aboard. Elias led her through the ship, explaining its features with a mix of pride and sarcasm. He noted her subtle reactions, the slight flicker of approval when she saw the advanced sensor arrays, the faint chime of interest at the reinforced shielding. Despite her outward disdain, she was clearly impressed. This, he said, opening the door to her quarters, is where you'll be staying. I had the environment adjusted to Irelden standards. Humidity levels, temperature, even the lighting, everything tailored for maximum comfort. For the first time, Sullivan's crystalline form dimmed slightly, a gesture of surprise. You adapted the environment for my physiology. Elias shrugged. Adaptability's a human specialty. Sullivan hesitated, her usual disdain softening for a fraction of a second. It will suffice. High praise, Elias said, flashing a grin. I'll let you get settled. We launch at 0600. As he walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that this mission was going to be anything but routine. The Eclipse Veil broke free of Argent Veil's docking clamps and sailed smoothly into the vastness of space. Commander Elias Varan felt a familiar comfort settle over him as the controls hummed beneath his hands. The void outside stretched in every direction, an endless expanse dotted with stars that pulsed faintly like distant beacons. Ambassador Karen Sullivan stood stiffly at the secondary console, her crystalline form casting fractured reflections across the ship's interior. She studied the navigation map with a cold intensity, as if willing it to reveal more details about their destination. Coordinates locked, Elias announced, breaking the silence. Next stop, uncharted space. Proceed with care, Commander, Sullivan said without looking up. The region ahead is volatile. Gravitational anomalies, energy storms. Your primitive instincts may not suffice. Elias raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his chair. You know, for someone so evolved, you've got a real talent for backhanded compliments. Her crystalline horns flickered briefly in what Elias had come to recognize as irritation. This is not a diplomatic mission. I am under no obligation to soften my words. Elias smirked and keyed the throttle, pushing the ship into faster-than-light travel. The stars outside blurred into streaks of light, and the hum of the quantum drive deepened. "Well, Ambassador," he said, turning his attention to the display, "you might be happy to know I'm not here for a warm handshake either. My job is to get us to the Radiant Core in one piece. Let me do my job, and I won't interfere with yours." She finally turned to look at him, her crystalline features shifting subtly as if trying to discern his sincerity. "Very well, Commander. But make no mistake, the core's recovery is far more important than your safety. Or mine." Comforting, Elias muttered under his breath as he returned to his controls. The first day of their journey passed uneventfully. Elias had programmed the Eclipse Veil to navigate around the known gravitational distortions in the region, choosing the safest, if slightly longer, route. Solovran spent most of her time reviewing Irelden records on the Radiant Core, her crystalline form glowing faintly as she worked. By the second day, the space around them began to grow more turbulent. The ship's sensors picked up faint ripples in the quantum field, anomalies that made the Eclipse Veil's navigation AI emit subtle warning chimes. Elias adjusted their course manually, guiding the ship through a narrow corridor of relatively stable space. "Anomalies are getting stronger," he said. "Might want to buckle up, Ambassador." Solovran glanced at him from across the bridge. "The core's energy signature is likely responsible for these disturbances. They will worsen as we draw closer." "Good to know," Elias replied. "And here I thought the galaxy was just throwing us a welcoming party." Before Solovran could respond, the ship's sensors triggered an alert. A massive gravitational spike was forming directly ahead, the space around it warping like heat waves over asphalt. "Hold on," Elias muttered, gripping the controls tightly. He pulled the ship into a sharp turn, skimming the edge of the anomaly. The Eclipse Veil shuddered violently, its shields flaring as they absorbed the strain. "Careful, Commander." Solovran snapped. Elias shot her a look. "What do you think I'm doing? Sightseeing?" The anomaly finally passed, and the ship stabilized. Elias let out a breath, checking the status of their systems. "Shields are holding. No major damage." Solovran didn't respond immediately. Her crystalline form had dimmed slightly, a rare sign of vulnerability. "You maneuvered through that well," she said at last, her tone begrudging. Elias blinked, caught off guard by the unexpected compliment. "Was that approval? I didn't know you had it in you." "Don't get used to it," she replied, her glow returning to its usual brilliance. As they approached the final stretch of their journey, the anomalies grew more frequent and unpredictable. Elias and Solovran fell into an uneasy rhythm. He piloted the ship through increasingly hostile conditions, while she monitored the core's energy readings, her expertise proving invaluable in navigating the distorted space. By the time they reached the coordinates, the Eclipse Veil was running on reserve power, its systems pushed to their limits. Elias brought the ship to a halt, letting it drift as they examined the planet below. The world was unlike anything either of them had seen. Its surface shimmered with an iridescent glow, as if the entire planet was composed of liquid crystal. Towering spires of light rose from the ground, their shapes shifting constantly, defying any attempt to categorize them. "The core is down there," Solovran said, her voice hushed with awe. Elias frowned at the readings on his console. "This planet doesn't match any known classifications. Atmosphere's toxic, gravitational fields unstable, and those energy readings. They're off the charts. How is this place even holding together?" "The core's influence," Solovran replied. "Its power has likely altered the planet's natural state, creating this anomaly." "Great," Elias said. "So we're landing on a death trap. Wonderful. Do you wish to remain on the ship while I retrieve the core?" Solovran asked, her tone laced with sarcasm. Elias snorted. "Not a chance. I didn't come all this way just to let you have all the fun." The descent was harrowing. The Eclipse Veil bucked and shuddered as it plunged through the planet's chaotic atmosphere, its shields flaring against the corrosive gases and sudden gravitational surges. Elias fought the controls every step of the way, his hands moving with practiced precision. Solovran sat silently in the co-pilot's seat, her crystalline form radiating tension. For once, she refrained from commenting on his piloting skills. When they finally broke through the swirling clouds, the ground below came into view. The liquid crystal surface shifted and flowed like a living organism, its movements synchronized with the towering spires of light. Elias spotted a relatively stable plateau near the strongest energy signature. "Hang on," he said, guiding the ship toward it. The landing was rough, but the eclipse veil held together. Elias exhaled as the engines powered down, glancing at Solovran. "Well, we made it. Mostly intact." She unstrapped herself, her crystalline features glowing faintly with determination. "We should proceed quickly. The core's energy is highly unstable. Prolonged exposure could have consequences." "Wonderful," Elias muttered, rising from his seat. "Let's grab the shiny relic and get out of here." The airlock hissed open, and they stepped onto the planet's surface, their suits shielding them from the toxic atmosphere. The ground beneath their boots shifted like a liquid, yet held firm enough to support their weight. Elias activated his wrist scanner, which immediately began beeping erratically. "These readings are insane," he said. "I've never seen anything like this." Solovran didn't respond. Her attention was fixed on the towering spire ahead, its light pulsing in rhythm with the planet itself. "The core is there," she said, her voice almost reverent. As they approached, the air around them seemed to hum with energy. Elias felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end, his combat instinct screaming that something wasn't right. Before he could voice his concerns, a shadow passed over them. He looked up, his stomach sinking as he saw a massive shape descending from the sky. It was a ship, but unlike any design Elias had ever encountered. Its sleek, predatory form seemed to ripple like liquid metal, and its engines emitted a low, menacing hum. "Unidentified vessel," Elias said, his voice tense. "I don't suppose you Irelden have friends out here?" Solovran's crystalline form dimmed slightly. "No. That is a Nexian raider. They hunt relics like the core. We must move quickly." Elias drew his sidearm, his grip tightening. "Looks like we've got company." The Nexian raider ship descended with an unnatural grace, its sleek, shimmering hull reflecting the chaotic lights of the planet's surface. Commander Elias Varan instinctively stepped in front of Ambassador Karen Solovran, raising his sidearm. "Not exactly friendly-looking neighbors," Elias muttered, his voice tight. Solovran's crystalline form glimmered with faint pulses, her equivalent of unease. "The Nexian are not to be underestimated. They adapt quickly to any threat and are relentless in their pursuit of ancient artifacts." "Sounds charming," Elias said dryly. "How long before they realize we're here?" "Judging by their trajectory," Solovran replied, consulting the holographic scanner on her forearm, "they already have." The raider ship landed with a hissing roar a few hundred meters away, its smooth surface folding open like the petals of a metallic flower. From within, figures emerged, tall, humanoid shapes clad in fluid armor that shimmered like oil on water. Their movements were eerily precise, as if each step was calculated to perfection. "They don't waste time," Elias muttered. "What's the plan?" Solovran's horns flared slightly as she straightened. "We retrieve the core before they can claim it. If necessary, I will negotiate for its release." Elias shot her a skeptical look. "Negotiate? With a bunch of relic-hunting predators? That's optimistic." "We have no other choice," Solovran said firmly. "The core must not fall into their hands." "Great," Elias said, checking the charge on his sidearm. "Let's hope they're in a listening mood." The path to the towering spire was treacherous. The crystalline ground shifted beneath their boots, and the ambient energy of the planet created distortions that made every step feel like wading through water. Elias kept his weapon raised, his sharp eyes scanning for threats, while Solovran moved with a determined grace, her focus fixed on the pulsing light of the core's location. As they approached the base of the spire, the air grew heavier, almost oppressive. The hum of the core's energy was no longer just a sound. It was a physical force, pressing against their suits and making their movements sluggish. Energy readings are spiking, Elias said, glancing at his wrist scanner. We're walking into a live wire. Sullivan didn't respond. Her crystalline form glowed faintly as she reached out to touch the spire's surface. The light from her body resonated with the structure, causing a small section of it to shift and open, revealing an entrance. This way, she said, stepping inside without hesitation. Elias followed, his instincts screaming at him to stay on high alert. The interior of the spire was a labyrinth of glowing corridors, the walls pulsing with the same rhythmic light as the core. Let me guess, Elias said, his voice echoing slightly. No blueprints for this place in the Unyielding archives. The core's creators left no record of its location, Sullivan replied, her tone reverent. This structure is older than our civilization itself. Wonderful, Elias muttered. Nothing like exploring a death trap on a tight schedule. As they moved deeper into the spire, the light grew brighter, and the oppressive energy became almost unbearable. Elias's breathing grew labored, his suit struggling to compensate for the increasing pressure. How much farther? He asked, his voice strained. We are close, Sullivan said, her crystalline form dimming slightly under the strain. The core's energy is. She stopped abruptly, her horns flaring in alarm. What is it? Elias asked, raising his sidearm. Before she could respond, the Nexian raiders appeared, their fluid forms emerging from the shadows. They moved with unsettling precision, their armor shifting and adapting as they approached. Elias cursed under his breath, firing a warning shot. The energy blast struck one of the raiders square in the chest, but instead of falling, its armor absorbed the impact, rippling like liquid before reforming. They're adapting, Sullivan said urgently. Conventional weapons will be ineffective. Yeah, I noticed, Elias replied, backing up as the raiders advanced. One of the raiders lunged, its arm transforming into a blade-like appendage. Elias dodged, narrowly avoiding the strike, and fired again. The blast barely slowed the creature down. We need a plan, Elias said, his voice tight. Sullivan stepped forward, raising her arms. Her crystalline form began to glow brightly, emitting a resonant hum that reverberated through the spire. The raiders paused, their movements faltering as if confused by the sound. What are you doing? Elias asked, glancing at her. Disrupting their synchronization, Sullivan replied, her voice strained. It will not last long. We must reach the core now. Elias didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed her arm and pulled her down a side corridor, leaving the disoriented raiders behind. The core chamber was a sight to behold. At the center of the vast, circular room floated the radiant core, a massive crystalline sphere that pulsed with light and energy. Its surface was etched with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change with each pulse, as if alive. Sullivan stopped in her tracks, her crystalline form glowing faintly in response to the core's presence. It is magnificent, she whispered. Elias, meanwhile, was focused on the room's perimeter. The walls were lined with strange, alien machinery, and the ambient energy made his skin crawl. Magnificent or not, we need to figure out how to secure it and get out of here, Elias said. Sullivan approached the core slowly, her movements reverent. This power, it is beyond anything we could have imagined. Yeah, and it's also why those raiders are breathing down our necks, Elias said, his voice sharp. Focus, Ambassador. Sullivan placed her hands on the core's surface, her horns flaring as she began to resonate with its energy. The patterns on the core shifted, glowing brighter in response to her touch. It is responding, she said, her voice filled with awe. I can activate the containment protocols. Great, Elias said, keeping his weapon trained on the entrance. Do it fast. We're out of time. The Nexian raiders reappeared just as Sullivan initiated the core's containment sequence. This time, they moved with greater speed and purpose, their forms shifting into jagged, weaponized shapes. Ambassador, we've got company. Elias shouted, firing a volley of shots to slow them down. Sullivan didn't respond. Her entire focus was on the core, her crystalline form glowing brightly as she synchronized with its energy. Elias gritted his teeth, switching to the ship's emergency flare gun. He fired it at the nearest raider, the intense heat and light forcing it to retreat temporarily. "Any time now, Solovran," he called out. "I need a moment longer," she replied, her voice strained. The raiders advanced again, undeterred. Elias fired another flare, but it was clear they were learning to counter his attacks. One of the raiders lunged, its blade-like arm slashing across his shoulder. Elias cried out in pain, stumbling back. His suit's integrity alarm blared as the blade cut through the outer layer. Before the raider could strike again, the core emitted a sudden pulse of energy, sending a shockwave through the chamber. The raiders froze, their forms destabilizing as the energy overwhelmed them. Solovran collapsed to her knees, her crystalline form flickering weakly. "The containment protocols are active," she said, her voice barely audible. Elias limped to her side, his shoulder bleeding beneath his damaged suit. "Good. Now let's get the hell out of here." The escape was a blur of frantic movement. The core's activation had destabilized the spire, causing the walls to crack and collapse around them. Elias half-dragged, half-carried Solovran back to the ship, dodging falling debris and the occasional reformed raider. By the time they reached the eclipse veil, the planet itself seemed on the verge of implosion. Elias launched the ship as soon as they were aboard, the engines straining to break free of the planet's gravity. As the ship cleared the atmosphere, the planet below erupted in a blinding explosion of light, the core's energy consuming everything in its vicinity. Elias slumped back in his seat, exhausted but relieved. Well, that was close. Solovran, seated beside him, managed a faint glow of acknowledgement. "The core is safe," she said. "For now," Elias replied, his gaze fixed on the fading light of the destroyed planet. "Let's hope it stays that way." The eclipse veil drifted in orbit, its hull scorched and battered from the chaotic escape. Commander Elias Varan slumped in the pilot's chair, his left arm wrapped in a makeshift sling as the automed worked on sealing his wounds. His shoulder ached from the deep cut inflicted by the Nexian raider, but the adrenaline hadn't quite worn off yet. Across the bridge, Ambassador Karen Solovran stood motionless by the viewport, her crystalline form dimmer than he had ever seen. The faint glow she emitted barely illuminated the control console she leaned against. The aftermath of resonating with the radiant core had drained her energy, leaving her uncharacteristically subdued. For a moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the hum of the ship's systems. Finally, Elias cleared his throat. "So," he said, his voice hoarse, "was it worth it?" Solovran turned her head slightly, her crystalline horns pulsing faintly. "The core is intact," she replied, her tone quieter than usual. "Its retrieval is a monumental achievement for my people." "Yeah, but at what cost?" Elias gestured toward the viewport, where the remnants of the crystalline planet drifted like shattered glass against the black void. "That planet's gone. The Nexian raiders aren't going to forget this, and now we've got a Galaxy-class power source sitting in our cargo hold. You think that's the end of it?" Solovran's horns flared faintly. "You cannot comprehend the significance of the radiant core. It is more than a power source, it is a symbol of our people's golden age, a beacon of hope for what we can achieve." Elias shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "A beacon of hope? That thing almost killed both of us, wiped out a planet, and turned a bunch of raiders into walking nightmares. Forgive me if I'm not feeling particularly hopeful right now." Solovran moved closer, her form flickering with an intensity that Elias recognized as frustration. "Your cynicism blinds you, Commander. The core's power is immense, yes, but with proper containment and study, it can be harnessed to rebuild civilizations, to create miracles." Elias leaned back in his chair, wincing as the motion tugged at his injured shoulder. "Or it could spark a galactic arms race. You really think the Irildin are the only ones who'll want a piece of this thing? The Coalition, the Nexian, the Syndicates, hell, even Earth's Defense Council would kill for something like this." "That is why it must remain with my people," Solovran said firmly. "We are the only ones capable of safeguarding it." Elias raised an eyebrow. Oh, really? Because last I checked, your people lost it in the first place. How'd that happen again? Internal conflicts, wasn't it? Solovran stiffened, her glow dimming. We have learned from our mistakes. This time will be different. Elias snorted. That's what everyone says right before they screw up again. For a moment, they stared at each other, the weight of the conversation pressing down like the oppressive gravity they had just escaped. Finally, Solovran turned away, her voice quieter. You think I do not share your fears, Commander? That I am blind to the risks. She placed a hand on the console, her form flickering faintly. But we cannot allow fear to dictate our actions. The core is too valuable, too important to abandon. Elias sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Maybe you're right, but the way I see it, that thing isn't just valuable, it's dangerous. And putting something that dangerous into anyone's hands, no matter how evolved they think they are, feels like a disaster waiting to happen. The tension on the bridge was broken by the soft chime of an incoming transmission. Elias frowned, glancing at the console. That's odd. We're supposed to be the only ones out here. He opened the channel, and the holo display flickered to life, revealing a figure clad in a weathered, patchwork spacesuit. The reflective visor obscured their face, but the voice that emerged was calm and steady. I'm glad to see you made it out alive, the figure said. Elias tensed. Who the hell are you? The figure tilted their head slightly. You can call me the custodian. I've been watching your progress. Solovran stepped forward, her crystalline form glowing faintly with renewed energy. The custodian? You were on the surface. Why did you not intervene? It wasn't my place, the custodian replied. The core is not a relic to be claimed or a weapon to be wielded. It is a test. Elias frowned. A test? Of what? The custodian's voice remained calm. Wisdom. Restraint. The ability to recognize when power must remain untouched. Solovran's horns flared with indignation. The core belongs to the Unyielding. It is our creation, our legacy. We have the right to determine its fate. And what will you do with it? The custodian asked, their tone measured. Use it to restore your civilization? To assert your dominance in the galaxy? Or will you repeat the mistakes of the past? Elias leaned forward, his expression grim. You're saying we should destroy it? The custodian was silent for a moment before responding. Perhaps. Or perhaps the true test is recognizing when something is too dangerous to exist at all. The custodian ended the transmission, leaving Elias and Solovran alone on the bridge once more. The weight of the conversation lingered, heavier than ever. Elias broke the silence. So, what now? Do we hand this thing over to the Unyielding and hope for the best? Or do we listen to the cryptic guy in the spacesuit and find a way to destroy it? Solovran didn't respond immediately. She moved to the viewport, her crystalline form dimmed with uncertainty. This decision is not yours to make, Commander. The core is Unyielding by right. And yet, here we are, Elias said, his voice soft but firm. You're not stupid, Solovran. You've seen what this thing can do. The question is, can your people handle it? Or will it tear you apart? Her form flickered faintly, a sign of internal conflict. I do not know. Elias stood, wincing as his injured shoulder protested. He moved to stand beside her, gazing out at the stars. Look, I'm just a pilot, but I've seen enough to know that some things aren't meant to be controlled. Maybe the custodian's right. Maybe the best thing we can do is let it go. After what felt like an eternity, Solovran nodded. Very well. We will destroy it. But the core's destruction must be handled carefully. Its energy could devastate entire systems if released improperly. Elias smirked faintly. Good thing we've got a ship full of fancy tech and an ambassador who knows her way around ancient relics. The next several hours were a blur of calculations, modifications, and tense discussions. Together, Elias and Solovran devised a plan to jettison the core into a nearby neutron star, its immense gravity ensuring that the core's energy would be consumed without a trace. As the eclipse veil approached the star, The radiant core pulsed one last time, its light brighter than ever. For a moment, Elias thought he heard a faint hum, almost like a whisper. Then, with a final push of the ship's thrusters, the core was gone, swallowed by the star's blinding light. As they set course for Coalition space, the tension between Elias and Solovran seemed to ease. The ambassador's crystalline form glowed with a softer, more subdued light, her usual sharpness replaced by quiet reflection. "You made the right call," Elias said, breaking the silence. "Perhaps," Solovran replied, "but the loss of the core will weigh heavily on my people. It was a part of our identity. Sometimes letting go is the only way to move forward," Elias said, his tone thoughtful. Solovran turned to him, her crystalline eyes gleaming faintly. "You are wiser than I gave you credit for, Commander." Elias chuckled. "Don't let it go to my head." As the stars stretched into streaks of light, the eclipse veil disappeared into the void, leaving behind the remnants of a legacy and the faint hope of a better future.